The momentum behind Bitcoin becoming a reserve asset is only increasing, especially in the Czech Republic. Obviously, we've talked the strategic Bitcoin reserve in the United States to death, but that still is in the process of potentially happening. That's just one of many huge news stories driving the cryptocurrency market this week. Luckily, I have NLW here to unpack it all on the Friday 5. Let's go.
Let's go.
What is up, everybody? I'm Scott Melker, also known as the Wolf of All Streets. Before we get started, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. A lot happening in the news this week. Without further ado, NLW, good morning, sir.
What's happening?
I can tell you that the other day I was starting to feel like there was never going to be an alt season again. It was over. I was starting to feel overwhelmed with emotions. Not really, but you know, the thoughts were creeping in. Talking to my team, and then I said, this has got to be the bottom.
Yeah.
And since then, price have bounced lovely. We have Bitcoin at $104,600, which the fact that we have sort of this overwhelming bearishness or questions about what's happening with the market when price is a few percent off the all-time high, I guess just shows you how impatient people are, but how badly altcoins have underperformed and how overexposed people likely are to them.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that that we've got kind of a more complex, thumbs up, thumbs down kind of scenario here where one, I think you're right. There's probably a mismatch between where people have exposure and what's doing well that's causing some discord. But then two, I think in general, people are kind of unmoored just because this cycle isn't following any of the patterns we're used to, like especially people who've been around a couple cycles. It always feels like it's breaking the cycle pattern, and then it's actually just the cycle pattern. Whereas this one really is kind of its own thing. And we don't know how much of that is related to unique events going on right now versus this is setting up a new cycle versus, who the hell knows. So even if it's not bad, it is destabilizing. And I think that that's part of kind of what a lot of folks are feeling.
I blame the memes. It's not their fault. I'm sure they're very kind and polite memes, but that's clearly where all the interest has been. I think ETH is going to blast off from here, though. That's a topic for another day. But a topic for today, no more debanking. Fed chair says U.S. banks perfectly able to serve crypto customers. I've got the clip right here quickly for us to watch. Let's do it.
With Bitcoin really is to look at, with crypto really is to look at the banks. And we think it's, banks are perfectly able to serve crypto customers as long as they understand and can manage the risks, and it's safe and sound. As a good number of our banks that we regulate and supervise do that. The threshold has been a little higher for banks engaging in.
So first of all, this is a wholesale reversal from everything we saw in the previous administration. And he says it so casually as if it's always been this way.
Yeah.
Right. But a lot of this obviously has to do with Trump being elected. I think the overturn of SAB 121, but pretending that there's a ton of banks that already do this and it's totally fine just seems like a bold-faced lie.
Yeah, but whatever. It's kind of like it's a lie that we know, but what? Yeah. I agree. This is a radical normalization. We skip over the part where we have to talk about what we used to do, just pretend it's always been like this and everyone's happy.
So what does this mean, in your opinion, for the market, right? We had the SAB 121 being overturned. Obviously know that now banks, if they choose to, can custody Bitcoin and other crypto assets without putting it as a liability on their balance sheet. This also means that a lot of the ETF issuers could theoretically move custody away from Coinbase and to some of the more trusted financial institutions like Bank of New York Mellon, State Street, Goldman, any of the huge custodians that we have in the United States. But is this sort of an all systems go signal that if banks want to do it, they can, which means we can get the full suite of financial services that exist for every other asset on Bitcoin?
So let me explain it. And obviously I'm completely making this up, but kind of my read on how this has progressed. there was a period for a little while there, pre-Luna, pre-FTX, where banks had, their little skunk works with, 10, 15, 20, maybe 50 people working on what their crypto products were going to be. Then we get Operation Choke Point 2.0, and that goes down to somewhere between 0 and call it 5, right? 0 for most, and then, a couple lone holdouts that are just keeping the flame, keeping the candle lit for a little while to see what happens. As it looks like Trump's going to get elected and things start going, maybe those 2 or 3 become, closer to 5, 10. We start to bring those plans back, pull out those old Google documents, start to see what was on that list. Trump gets elected. All of a sudden, they're actually making plans. You're getting some dates around those plans, trying to prioritize which they are. And then every single thing from then is sort of just locking in those dates, moving those dates up, right? So SAB 121 repealed. Okay, that's the thing to move forward. This, Powell confirming, move forward even faster. So I don't think any one of these things, I think the catalytic event is the shift in administration, and everything else has been sort of just pushing that, forward. So that's my take. I think that it's, basically my guess is that I don't think that anyone who hadn't been working towards this stuff is going to watch that and now finally go. I think that a lot of people had been sort of everything just keeps adding up to a stronger and stronger signal to be moving.
I wonder how quickly this will actually happen, right? I mean, at what point are people just going to have Bitcoin or ETFs in their Schwab portfolio, and it just becomes another part of their portfolio that they can take loans against or use as margin for trading, or those assets will count for getting a mortgage, right? It's just could be a different world.
Yeah, I think that the big banks definitely feel in general a little bit more immune to kind of FOMO and game theory as opposed to some other industries. I don't think that you're going to see kind of a race to be first, because I think that most of those banks are they're thinking about, retaining and increasing their relationships with their existing customers versus sort of going and trying to peel off. Now, that doesn't mean that some banks won't be more aggressive, but I feel like to the extent that you wanted to be aggressive, you were already working on things. I think when it comes to, the mass normalization, it's sort of just, slow and steady and on its own pace.
Right. So I think we get some early adopters, then the sort of mid-tier, and then maybe 10 years down the road, literally every bank is forced to do it because it's just another asset like your stock portfolio or anything else. Either way, man, seeing Jerome Powell just so dismissively answer that as if it was the default setting was just pretty surreal and incredible, and kind of have to pinch yourself.
Totally. I mean,
look back 18 months.
It's nice to have the wild new statement be totally in our favor.
Yeah. So next story, Robinhood CEO calls for U.S. to embrace tokenization. I would say we can add Larry Fink into this as well, because if you saw him at Davos last week, he basically said, we want to be at the forefront of tokenizing stocks and bonds and kind of pushing the SEC to rapidly approve asset tokenization. For those who are paying attention, even before the Bitcoin spot ETF, BlackRock writes a yearly report, basically summary, and everybody focused on the Bitcoin part of it in March of 2024. But actually, there was a larger section on tokenizing everything and BlackRock's deep belief in that. So this isn't a new sentiment from Larry Fink or from institutions, but we're really starting to see momentum when you see Vlad at Robinhood, who controls 24 million, I believe, retail subscribers and users. It's time to start paying attention that this trend could really come, right? Talking about tokenizing private equity, stocks, bonds, effectively everything. I mean, did you give this a read, and what were your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's an aggressive positioning, right? I mean, this is not wading a toe into a debate. This is a full-throated, total reevaluation, rethinking of everything from accredited investor rules to financial access and beyond. I think, to your point with Fink, and we've talked about this before, one of the most wonderful parts about Papa Larry coming into this space is the utter obliteration of the Bitcoin versus blockchain narrative that he did. If you remember, right after they announced the Bitcoin spot ETF, the Sorkins of the world, on mainstream media kept trying to pin him down and get him to sort of reiterate some old blockchain, Jamie Dimon style blockchain, not Bitcoin narrative. And he basically just said both and thank you. And, I think that that's sort of further development of that. The interesting thing about this is 100% inevitable. It just is, in the sense that it's just the so many of the constraints of the way that we trade and our markets right now are technology mediated, right? We are operating on the basis of old patterns where the delimiting factor was technology. It has now been for years no longer the factor, and so we're now in the weird period where technology has gotten to a point where some totally new, much more efficient market system is possible, and we're just not doing it. And that's a friction and a disequilibrium that can't last long in this sort of market system. Now, the exact parameters of how that shakes out, how that rolls out, I think are big questions, right? I'm sort of, firmly in principle against accredited investor rules. I think that any politicians who want to try to resuscitate, the American life dream, which is the American dream, which is on life support, starting by, breaking down barriers to what people have access to, rather than them having to sort of like nihilistically hide it and, and meme coin their faces off, is probably a good idea. But there are obviously a lot of questions. There is going to need to be a totally new regulatory regime where, a reconsideration of what investor protections, I hate that term, but, what disclosures look like, when it's appropriate for tokenized stocks to come in, what the lines, we already have this weird blurry space between private markets and public markets, the series EFGs that happen now. Like there's going to have to be a whole new consideration for how this all plays out. But I think that you're getting a louder and louder chorus, and you already have the infrastructure making this possible. So it's just a matter of time. I don't think it's just on the horizon, and I think that regulators are going to really slow walk it. But it's coming.
In my opinion, the reason it hasn't happened yet is because of all of the incumbents that obviously want to still continue to be toll collectors in the middle of all of these transactions. So I lean towards a more skeptical view, which is that we will adopt the technology, but they're waiting to have enough time, as you said, to regulate it and to figure out how to get their piece, right? So I don't see a world where you and I decide that we want to trade, Tesla stock in size and just do that back and forth. Maybe it will be tokenized, but they're going to find a way to make sure that it's cleared through some clearinghouse or third party to, confirm those trades, make sure nobody gets scammed and that it's real. I mean, listen, it's a scary world. It's amazing, but it's a scary world where everybody can sell everything to anyone because, it's going to just be largely scams.
Yeah. I mean, listen, how to deal with scams is a much bigger question, and the appropriate ways. I think that the one sort of binary that I would reject, or that I would encourage policymakers to reject, because I don't think it's really a problem with the people who are listening to this particular show. There are lots and lots of ways to deal with scams that don't involve diminishing consumer choice. We have the bluntest hammer possible when we handle scams by just disallowing people to engage with an entire category of things. That is obviously not the way to treat adults. Scams are going to get bigger. They're going to get harder to identify. They're going to get worse. The era of AI is going to make scams much more difficult. We're already drowning in, text message scams, phone calls. I mean, you name it. There's scams everywhere. So we do have a scam problem, but again, just limiting one group's access to a category of investment is probably not the not only not the right answer. It's it's insufficient to the actual problem if you are trying to solve that problem.
I 100% agree. I just don't see them letting go so easily. Is the main point.
100% agree on that front.
Yeah. So then obviously we have, title here, Bitcoin is a reserve asset. Central banks are waking up. This is not theoretical anymore. Anyone who is following this story, obviously this week, check central bank chief mulls Bitcoin as possible reserve asset. Notable because this guy is the governor of the central bank. This is not somebody throwing a dart and hoping for the best. Of course, you can read, if you choose to, his Twitter thread about it. But then the finance chief immediately warned that this might be a bad idea. No surprises. But as an update, it did basically pass, at least for them to evaluate it as a reserve in Bitcoin, which is what he was asking for. So the Central Bank of the Czech Republic now taking a very serious look at this. It actually triggered a lot of sort of fear, I would say, in the United States. Lummis very quickly quoted Ricky Bobby and said, if you ain't first, you're last. The United States needs to start taking a very serious look at this and to start accelerating. I mean, the game theory is here. This is now an arms race for Bitcoin as a strategic reserve.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see whether this plays out as, an avalanche where a couple, central banks rolling down the hill charges everyone up. I think it really depends on which central banks there are. I'm not surprised that Lummis is using this as an example to sort of increase her arguments for why we need to be on this train. One of the ways that this could play out, which would be wildly unsatisfying from a media perspective, but probably fairly realistic for the real world, is we just have so much of this discussion over the next few years that by the time it actually happens, everyone has already totally assumed and almost priced in that it's going to happen.
Yeah.
That's kind of my base scenario, right? That like this conversation, unless we have a surprise shock rush in from the US or, from another big central bank, I'm talking about over the next year where it's a major G7 type power that, makes a meaningful push in. My guess is that by the time people start doing it, they're all just going to assume that they're going to do it. I don't even think it's that far off as an assumption at this point, So it's going to be pretty interesting to see how it plays out. Again, I think that I would expect to see the people who want there to be game theory around it really use every little indicator we have to push more aggressively for the US to jump in. I mean, obviously we are the starting gun in a way that no one else could be, but it'll be interesting to see.
She didn't like it. ECB's Lagarde slaps down check proposal for Bitcoin reserves. They are a part of the European Union, but they don't use the euro. So there is some nuance there. But if you watch the speech, which is just a miserable watch that I highly recommend. I mean, she basically snickered and couldn't hold it in when she was talking about this and talked about how her son, against her better judgment and advice, lost 60% of his money investing in crypto. She's always hated it. She's hated it as a central banker. She's hated it as an individual. And I don't think they're going to take her opinion. But still notable that the head of the European Central Bank is very outwardly against adding Bitcoin to the balance sheet.
At some point over the last 10 years, Europe stood looking towards the future and decided to turn 180 degrees around and walk the other direction. And the more that this happens, the less that anyone gives even one iota of a fart about what they think about things. It is just unfathomable how little resonance these folks have, especially because it's like the same people who have been in power in these institutions for 75 years. There's the absolute unit, Augustin Carstens, there's like just no one cares, and
all Bond villains.
Everyone. It's actually like unbelievable how little influence these people who are theoretically in extremely influential positions have. So I don't know, whatever. I roll from the American crowd. Sorry to my European friends.
Dude, we're Team America over here. But either way, listen, just as an honorable mention, we're obviously talking about Bitcoin on the balance sheet of nations as a strategic reserve asset. I can't even keep up with how many states are now talking about it here in our country and how many are actually advancing the ball. I believe Utah advanced the ball, Arizona. These things are actually leaving committee and heading to real votes. Texas obviously has their own proposal. So these things are going to happen, whether on the nation state level or state level. I mean, and just as this was the honorable mention, I mean, MicroStrategy announces pricing of its strike preferred stock offering and upsizes the deal from 250 to 584. We don't need to dig into it. I've done it before, but I do want to highlight the upsizes the deal from 250 to 584, meaning that there is still endless demand for everything Saylor has to throw in the market.
The scary thing for Saylor now, where he appears this week, right?
Cover of Forbes right alongside was Do Kwon and SBF and
Elizabeth
Thanos. And yeah.
It's the Jim Cramer of magazine covers, man. It is, it's dangerous. I mean, but look,
but it's not just like market tops. It's like you end up in jail.
Yeah, exactly.
It's horrid. Yeah.
Someone's got to break the pattern. So here's hoping that Saylor could do it, but the problem is that they style them the same way. It's like they want it to be like this. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like, most magazine covers, I don't know, there's a variety of ways that people appear on the cover. Not with Forbes. With Forbes, there's a very specific face on, here up kind of a thing, never smiling. It's the mugshot before the mugshot.
It's not happening this time.
Yeah.
We ain't going out like that. I mean, the other big story, obviously, this week, since I can't even stomach him being on that cover right now and don't want to talk about it anymore, is obviously the AI arms race. China's DeepSeek AI is good for Bitcoin, says Standard Chartered. Just to give the good, quick and dirty here, obviously, DeepSeek was launched. Somehow over the weekend, everybody found out that it was much faster and cheaper than OpenAI. It dumped American markets, including Bitcoin, for about a few hours. And then we got into the obvious, oh, they stole it all and they didn't actually do this. And now we're just going to try to figure it out for a while, right? But apparently OpenAI has actual evidence that its models helped train China's DeepSeek. Apparently they had done this with inferior chips. They didn't have NVIDIA chips. Now we think that maybe some companies in Singapore were slinging them black market NVIDIA chips. There's going to be a lot to unpack here, but at the end of the day, the point of that first article is that faster, cheaper technology is probably good.
Yeah, there's from the beginning of this story, there's never been a question. If you zoom out to just from a consumer perspective, is it a good or a bad thing? It's an unmitigatedly good thing. I think there's a reasonable question around how much cheaper they actually offering. You know, one of the big sort of conspiracy theory pieces of this that I think is worth examining is how much is the price reduction artificial because it's being subsidized from somewhere else? Because that's going to have a big impact on how much it drags down prices from the American model companies. But look, in a lot of ways, this just accelerates what was inevitable, which is the cost of intelligence coming down. It's already down 1,000x over the last 2 years. It's going to just keep coming down from here, and it's just going to keep getting more powerful. So, from a consumer perspective, cheaper intelligence is basically nothing but good. The interesting thing from a market reaction perspective is so initially everything sold off. Bitcoin did what it always did, which is like, because it's the only thing that's trading at the all the time. As the market starts to digest news, it becomes a leading indicator. And sure enough, it did that again on Sunday night, leading into the market rout on Monday. Nvidia lost the market cap of Mexico in a single day, the biggest loss ever on the stock market. Now, I think that my general fact pattern over the last couple of years is that ChatGPT comes out the same time that Powell starts the hiking cycle. And for a very long period there during the hiking cycle, it was AI enthusiasm versus macro, right? That was the battle in terms of attitudes and stock prices. And AI did a lot of heavy lifting for a long period of time, that entire interval. After the market, the interest rates, we moved to the cutting cycle. AI didn't have to do as much, and Nvidia was, people keep looking for reasons to reprice Nvidia, but it just keeps doing so well that every time they do, it's one of these narrative things, and then it just goes right back up. I think this is that again a little bit, but I think when it comes to Bitcoin, what's good about this is this is a very specific, even if you are an Nvidia bear because of this, even if you think that this, the cost of compute, the usage of this compute isn't going to rise as fast as the cost comes down. And so you're bearish on Nvidia and chips in general, or at least chips, from Nvidia. Bitcoin, after the very quick correlation, decoupled, right? And people stopped.
Straight back up.
Yeah, people stopped. They realized that this was specific to a specific type of stock. And I actually think that that's really good from an understanding perspective, where Bitcoin is not just a sort of high beta stock. It is its own thing. And it's almost better that it initially kind of tried to be that old modality of, high beta stock. And then people were like, wait a second, that's stupid. And moved right back.
We've seen a few examples of it, right? I mean, where we kind of have these market events, these mini black swans, and Bitcoin every single time, if you look at it on the chart, just paints this huge wick down and a bounce, right? It happened right under 90, closed the day right back where it started in the mid 90s. It just happened the other day when it went to 97, closed right back up at 104 or 105 on the Nvidia, and it happens fast. So very clearly right now there's exceptional demand for Bitcoin outside of the other markets, to your point, and they don't wait long to buy the dip. When you see these, if you want to be a participant in buying that dip, it might only last for a few hours.
Yep. I think that the mega trend that we're in now isn't just institutionalization, which is obviously the mega trend we've been in for some time. It's recalibrating and catching up on exposure. And I think to your point, catching up on exposure it's a long-term, rotation sort of strategy. It's not a short-term, we have to get as much in. It's like, we're moving to a world where you're going to have 2, then 3, then 5% in Bitcoin. And you have a mandate to do that over some period of time. And so you're right. Each time it, dips a little bit, you're programmed to go to scoop a little bit up, right? And kind of move that forward. So I think that we're going to see a lot more of that throughout this year. I think it's going to take a very long time for organizations en masse to get to their base level of Bitcoin exposure, in this new paradigm that we live in now.
100% agree. I'll tell you who probably wasn't buying the dip this week when that happened, and that's this lovely woman here, Elizabeth Warren, pressing Lutnick on crypto, firm loved by outlaws. What a title from Bloomberg here, right? Loved by Tether, loved by outlaws. I mean, they just, I would say actually 97% of outlaws that were surveyed said that they love Tether in the outlaw survey that was nationally distributed. But she's, listen, she's been marginalized, but damn if she's not on TV a lot, screaming her face off RFK, screaming her face off Lutnick, screaming her face off, but basically saying, hey, Lutnick, your firm, Cantor Fitzgerald, which says you have all of the Tether reserves and you're now an investor in, is backing, North Korean criminals. It's the same old. It's just amazing that we're still doing this. I guess that's it.
Yeah. I got to tell you, for whoever's listening from the Warren camp, if you're going to go with the crypto is for criminals narrative, do not use the single coolest word we've ever invented to describe criminals.
Outlaws.
Wyatt Earp, like Robin Hood,
James,
Buffalo
man,
Bill Hickok. Like, come on, these people those are outlaws. Like, why would you call them outlaws? You don't want to call them outlaws. Outlaws are awesome. Call them, I don't know, dirty criminals or something. Just terrible branding.
I mean,
but you know what? She's reeling from the apex of her power, diminishing slowly over time until she's reduced to just when she's finally, off into her journey in a next life, she'll just resurface as the occasional ghostly open letter about some financial issue, and that'll be her legacy.
I hate to say this out loud, but in a conversation I had with John Deaton yesterday, he did point out, which I've said many times, listen, most parties that have a sweeping victory don't continue to have that sweeping victory at the midterms, right? So there's a very, very good chance that the Senate could swing back blue in 2 years during the midterms. She would be the chair of the Senate Finance Committee again.
Yeah. We'll see. It's too early to start, our off-topic political chat, I think, for this. But God, I suppose that'll be good for our frothy, conversations.
We'll have so much to talk about. We'll have to look at her face. Listen, that was kind of it, but I just want to, since we're talking about stablecoins, market surged past 200 billion, signaling potential crypto price upswing. Of course, every time we print dollars, that means people are buying Bitcoin. And Tether bringing its 140 billion USDT stablecoin to Bitcoin and Lightning Networks. Lightning Networks still exists. That's the news. Good job.
Rocking and rolling, man. Playing a long game.
Stablecoin adoption happening and stablecoins coming to Bitcoin. I mean, that feels like a piece of news. I have a feeling there won't be mass adoption of that too quickly, but I think it's a very cool story.
Absolutely. That the whole point with all these things is choice and availability, and each little nugget of infrastructure coming together to form an unassailable whole. So all good things.
Do you think Lagarde and Warren are friends? They look like friends.
I don't know that they have the capacity to be friends with anyone anymore. I think they're just.
I was going to say, they have friends?
Yeah, every night they go home and start jotting down on a manual notebook what they're going to be mad about next.
It's like Buscemi and Billy Madison.
Yeah, exactly.
Puts on the lipstick, crosses off the name from the death list. All right, guys, that's all we got for you today. Another great episode of the Friday Five. We'll be back with you next week. Give NLW a follow, obviously. Check out the breakdown, all of his channels. And until next week, thank you, guys. Thanks, man.
Later.